The hospital was already quiet when she clocked out too quiet. Fluorescent lights hummed over empty hallways and the night air outside smelled like rain and asphalt. She walked past the ER doors without looking back, unaware that somewhere above the city rotor blades were already cutting through the dark. Minutes later, everything changed. Boots hit the floor in perfect rhythm. Radios crackled once, then silence. Armed men in unmarked uniforms moved through the emergency department with surgical precision eyes, sharp voices low. They weren't lost. They weren't asking questions. They were looking for one person. A stunned nurse whispered her name. The team leader stopped, turned, and spoke a single word that froze the room. Ma'am. No one understood why battle-hardened Navy SEALs would stand at attention inside a civilian hospital. No one understood who she really was, or what mistake had already been made by underestimating her. This wasn't a rescue. It was a reckoning. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And if you're drawn to stories where silence hides power, don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. By the time the digital clock above the nurse's station flicked from 11:58 p.m. to 11:59, Emily Carter had already finished the kind of work no one ever thanked her for. She moved quietly through the east wing of the emergency department, rubber soles whispering against the polished linoleum. A final IV line adjusted. A blanket pulled higher over a shivering patient. A chart checked one last time, not because policy demanded it, but because she trusted habits more than luck. Emily was 38, though most people guessed younger. Her brown hair was pulled into a no-nonsense bun, her scrubs faded from years of washing, her face composed in a way that read as calm, or to some detached. She spoke when necessary. She listened more than she talked, and she never explained herself. To most of the staff at Mercy General Hospital, she was simply Emily, the night shift charge nurse, who took extra shifts, declined promotions, and never joined the gossip huddles near the vending machines. Competent, reliable, unremarkable. That's what they thought. The ER had slowed to a lull, the kind that came before either dawn or disaster. Only 6 patients remained under observation. The trauma bays were empty. The city outside, somewhere between suburbs and industrial sprawl, slept uneasily beneath a low cloud ceiling. At the central desk, Dr. Mark Reynolds snapped his pen shut and stretched his arms. 46 years old, board certified, confident to the point of arrogance. He wore his authority the way some men wore cologne, too much, and always noticeable. "All right," he said, scanning the board. "If nothing explodes in the next 5 minutes, I'm calling it." Emily didn't respond. She was reviewing a patient's vitals on the monitor, eyes narrowing slightly. Reynolds noticed. "Something you want to say?" he asked, half smiling. Emily glanced up. Room 3. Blood pressures drifting, heart rates compensating too fast. Reynolds waved a dismissive hand. "He's stable. Labs were clean. Probably anxiety." "Anxiety doesn't cause that pattern," Emily said calmly. "Not with those respirations." The smile vanished. "I've been doing this a long time," Nurse Carter Reynolds replied, voice tightening. "If I thought there was a problem, I'd handle it." Emily held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then she nodded once and turned back to the chart. "Yes, doctor." The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds, but it left a residue in the air, something sharp and unresolved. From the waiting area, a young resident watched the interaction and quickly looked away. Everyone had learned the unspoken rule: don't challenge Reynolds and don't side with Emily when she does. It never ended well. Emily finished her final documentation and logged out of the system. 1:15:09 p.m. She removed her badge and clipped it to the inside pocket of her jacket instead of the outside. A habit so ingrained, she no longer thought about it. As she walked toward the staff lockers, the automatic doors hissed open to admit a pair of EMTs pushing a gurney at speed. Incoming, one of them called out. "Male, late 40s. Unresponsive. No ID." The gurney rolled past Reynolds, who was already pulling on gloves. Emily stopped. Something was wrong. Not the patient that happened every night. It was the way the EMTs moved. Their urgency wasn't panicked. It was controlled, disciplined, almost rehearsed. Emily watched as the sheet shifted slightly, revealing a forearm marked by old scars. Not surgical, not accidental, parallel, clean. Her jaw tightened just a fraction. Vitals, Reynolds demanded. BP 88/60, an EMT replied. Pulse 130. Oxygen dropping. Reynolds swore under his breath. Trauma Bay 2. Move. Emily stood frozen for half a second. Then she stepped forward, adjusting the IV line as the gurney passed. Did he say anything? She asked quietly. The EMT glanced at her surprised. Just one thing. Kept asking if he'd missed the window. Emily nodded as if that meant something. And to her it did. She followed them into Trauma Bay 2, despite technically being off the clock. Reynolds noticed. Emily, you're done for the night. I know, she said. I just want to observe. He hesitated, then shrugged. Fine. Don't get in the way. The patient's shirt was cut away. More scars. Old fractures that had healed imperfectly. A tattoo partially obscured by time and ink bleed letters she couldn't fully see. Emily's eyes tracked every movement, every number on the monitor, every decision Reynolds made. And then she saw it. A subtle delay. A choice made half a second too late. No, she said softly. Reynolds didn't hear her, or chose not to. Doctor, she said again, louder. If you intubate now, I said, I've got it, Reynolds snapped. Step back. Emily stepped back, but her gaze never left the patient. The procedure began. The monitor spiked, then dipped. An alarm chirped. Reynolds cursed again. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Damn it, he muttered. Why isn't he responding? Emily already knew the answer. She'd seen this pattern before, in places where hesitation got people killed. She reached into her pocket, not for her phone, but for a small, worn card she kept folded in thirds. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. She turned away from the trauma bay and walked down the corridor out of sight. At the end of the hall, beneath a flickering exit sign, she made a call. It lasted 12 seconds. Yes, she said. No, I'm off duty. Location confirmed. Then, after a pause, I'll wait. She ended the call and leaned her head briefly against the wall, eyes closed. When she opened them, the hospital felt different, as if something massive had shifted quietly and visibly just beyond the walls. Back in Trauma Bay 2, Doctor Reynolds stared at the monitor. As the patient's condition worsened, a cold realization creeping in. Outside, far above the cloud cover, something metal and loud was already changing course. Emily checked her watch. Midnight had passed. The first thing Dr. Mark Reynolds did when the monitor alarm blared again was raise his voice. Push fluids. Now. A nurse complied instantly, fingers moving fast, eyes flicking between the IV bag and the dipping numbers on the screen. The heart rate climbed too fast. The blood pressure lagged behind. It was the kind of imbalance that didn't forgive ego. Emily stood near the doorway of Trauma Bay. 2 arms folded, posture relaxed in a way that irritated Reynolds more than open defiance ever could. She wasn't scrubbing in. She wasn't hovering. She was watching. And she was counting. Reynolds noticed her gaze again. If you're going to stand there, he snapped, at least make yourself useful. I am, Emily said evenly. He scoffed. By doing what? Judging I'm tracking time. That earned a laugh from one of the residents, short, nervous, immediately regretted. Reynolds shot the young man a look, then turned back to Emily. This isn't a classroom, he said. If you have something to say, say it. Emily hesitated. Not because she lacked confidence, because she knew exactly what would happen if she spoke. She took a breath anyway. He's not crashing from blood loss, she said. You're treating the symptom, not the cause. Reynolds' jaw tightened. And you know that how? Because his oxygen saturation is falling despite adequate ventilation, Emily replied. And because his pupils are sluggish, not dilated. And because his muscle tone hasn't degraded the way it would with hypovolemia. Silence fell, thin, brittle. Reynolds stared at her. You're a nurse. Yes, Emily said. And I've seen this before. In a textbook, he shot back. Emily didn't answer. That was what did it. Reynolds turned away from the monitor and faced her fully, his voice low, but sharp. You don't get to undermine me in my own trauma bay. Not now. Not ever. I'm not undermining you, Emily said. I'm trying to keep him alive. The resident shifted uncomfortably. Another nurse looked down at her shoes. Reynolds exhaled hard. "Step out," he said. "You're off the clock." Emily held his gaze for one long second. In it was no anger, no fear, just something like disappointment. Then she nodded. Understood. She turned and walked out. The automatic doors slid shut behind her with a soft hiss that sounded far too final. Inside, Reynolds forced himself to refocus. He adjusted medication dosages, ordered another scan, tried to convince himself the unease in his chest was nothing more than adrenaline. But the numbers didn't lie. The patient's vitals continued their slow, merciless slide. "Why isn't he responding?" Reynolds muttered. No one answered. Down the hall, Emily retrieved her jacket from the locker room. She moved with purpose, slipping her arms into the sleeves, zipping it halfway. The badge stayed in her pocket. As she walked toward the exit, she passed a glass wall overlooking the ambulance bay. Outside, rain had begun to fall, streaking the pavement with silver lines under the sodium lights. Her phone vibrated once. She didn't take it out. Instead, she changed direction and headed toward the stairwell that led to the helipad access corridor, a route staff rarely used unless there was an incoming airlift. The door was locked. Emily pressed her palm against the reader beside it. The light blinked red. She waited. 2 seconds later, it blinked green. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Emily didn't react. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The corridor smelled faintly of oil and disinfectant. Emergency lighting cast long shadows along the walls. At the far end, another door led up to the roof. She stopped halfway, listening. Through the concrete and steel, barely audible, came a low, distant thrum. Rotor blades. Back in Trauma Bay 2, the patient convulsed. Seizing someone, shouted. Reynolds cursed and barked orders. "Get me the benzos." Now. The medication was administered. The seizure subsided, but the monitor flatlined for half a heartbeat too long before resuming its erratic pattern. Sweat beaded on Reynolds' forehead. "What am I missing?" he whispered, not realizing he'd spoken aloud. At that exact moment, the hospital's overhead speakers crackled to life. "Attention all staff," a calm voice announced. "This is hospital security. Please remain in your current locations until further notice." Confused murmurs rippled through the ER. Reynolds looked up. "What the hell is this?" No one answered. Outside, the rain intensified as a dark shape descended through the clouds, lights cutting through the night. On the helipad, wind whipped across the concrete as the helicopter touched down, its engines roaring, its presence unmistakable. Inside the stairwell, Emily climbed steadily, not hurried, not slow. Each step echoed with a familiarity she hadn't felt in years. At the roof access door, she stopped and checked her watch. 3 minutes late. She exhaled once. Then she pushed the door open. The noise hit like a wall. Wind, rain, rotor wash. Figures moved with precision around the aircraft. Helmets, vests, weapons slung but ready. No insignia. No wasted motion. One of them turned and saw her. He froze. Then, without hesitation, he straightened and brought his hand up in a crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady even over the roar. Emily returned the salute, not sharply but correctly. Down in the ER, Dr. Reynolds stared at the monitor as the patient's blood pressure plummeted again, and somewhere deep in his gut a terrible certainty began to form. The helicopter's engines powered down in a controlled whine, the roar fading into a heavy rain-soaked silence broken only by the hiss of cooling metal. Rotor blades slowed overhead, still slicing the air like a warning rather than a farewell. Emily Carter stood on the helipad with rain plastering her hair against her jacket, her posture relaxed but unmistakably alert. The men around her moved with the kind of discipline that didn't come from drills alone, it came from consequences. The team leader removed his helmet. His hair was close-cropped, his face lined by years spent squinting into dust and sun. He studied Emily for a moment, then nodded once. "Apologies for the delay, ma'am," he said. "Weather pushed us off course." "You're here now," Emily replied. "That's what matters." Below them, Mercy General Hospital glowed like an island of light in the dark city. Somewhere inside, a man was dying and every second counted. "What's his status?" the team leader asked. "Deteriorating," Emily said. "Misdiagnosed. They're chasing the wrong failure." The team leader's jaw tightened. "Do they know who he is?" "No," Emily answered. "And if they did, it wouldn't change the physics of what's happening inside his body." She turned toward the roof access door. I need full control when we get down there. You'll have it, he said without hesitation. Then, after a brief pause, security's already clearing a path. Hospital administrations. Confused. Emily almost smiled. Almost. Good, she said. Confusion buys time. They moved. Down in the ER, confusion had already begun to ripple outward. Doctor. Mark Reynolds stood at the foot of the trauma bed, gloves stained, mind racing. The patient's vitals were unstable in ways that no longer made sense within the framework he'd been using. Run the labs again, he snapped. Check for toxins. Maybe we missed something. We already did, a nurse said quietly. Twice. Reynolds glared at her. Then do it a third time. Before she could respond, the double doors to the ER slid open. 2 men stepped inside, tall, broad, wearing plain clothes that somehow still screamed military. Their eyes scanned the room in a fraction of a second, mapping exits, threats, positions. Hospital security rushed forward, flustered. You can't be in here, this is a restricted. One of the men raised a hand. Not aggressively, not threateningly, just enough. Federal business, he said calmly. Stand down. Something in his tone made the guard stop mid-sentence. Reynolds turned. Who are you? The man looked at him, assessing. We're here for the patient in Trauma Bay 2. Reynolds' heart skipped. That patient is under my care. For the moment, the man replied. Before Reynolds could protest, the overhead speakers crackled again. Attention, the same calm voice said. All non-essential personnel, please clear the emergency department immediately. What the hell is going on? Reynolds demanded. No one answered him. Nurses began ushering patients into adjacent wings. Doors closed. Curtains were drawn. The ER, once chaotic, became eerily quiet. Then the side doors opened again. Emily walked in. She looked different, not in any obvious way, but in the way gravity seemed to bend toward her presence. Her jacket was damp, her hair still pulled back, her expression unreadable. Every conversation stopped. Reynolds stared. Emily. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were on the monitor. How long has he been hypertensive? She asked. Reynolds bristled. You were dismissed. Emily stepped closer to the bed. Answer the question. 20 minutes, he said through clenched teeth. Emily nodded once. Too long. She reached out and adjusted the ventilator settings with a sure hand, then glanced at the IV lines. Why is he on this protocol? She asked. Because that's standard for. This isn't standard, Emily cut in. This is specialized. Reynolds' face flushed. You don't get to override my decisions. Emily finally turned to him. For the first time, there was steel in her eyes. I do, she said quietly. Because if you don't let me, he dies. Silence fell like a dropped scalpel. One of the men in plain clothes cleared his throat. Doctor, he said to Reynolds, you're going to step back now. Reynolds looked from the man to Emily, disbelief giving way to anger. On what authority? The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. Emily reached into her jacket and pulled out the folded card she'd carried for years. She placed it on the metal tray beside the bed and slid it toward Reynolds. He glanced down. Then his breath caught. The card wasn't flashy. No photo. No seal in gold leaf. Just a name, a designation, and a line of authorization he'd only ever seen referenced in training manuals, never in real life. Reynolds swallowed. This can't be right, he said. Emily leaned in, her voice low enough that only he could hear. You ignored my warning, she said. That was your choice. What happens next doesn't have to be. Reynolds stepped back, hands trembling. Emily turned to the team. Prep him for immediate intervention, she said. I need ultrasound guidance and a clean field. Now. The response was instant. Monitors were repositioned. Equipment rolled in. Orders were followed not because of rank, but because of certainty. As Emily scrubbed in her movements precise, the patient's monitor flickered again. The numbers dipped dangerously low. Someone cursed under their breath. Emily didn't. She took her place at the bedside, eyes locked on the screen, mind already several steps ahead. Everyone listen carefully, she said. We have one shot at this. Outside the trauma bay, Doctor. Mark Reynolds stood frozen, watching his authority evaporate in real time. And deep inside his chest, a single terrifying realization settled in. He hadn't just underestimated a nurse. He had gotten in the way of something far bigger than himself. The room felt smaller once Emily took control. It wasn't the number of people. If anything, there were more bodies packed into Trauma Bay. 2 now, but the way the air itself seemed to tighten, as if the space recognized authority and made room for it. Ultrasound, Emily said. The probe was in her hand before the word finished leaving her mouth. She studied the screen with focused intensity, eyes moving in quick, efficient patterns. Her breathing slowed not from nerves but from discipline. Years of training surfaced without effort, each decision slotting into place with mechanical clarity. There, she said. Pause. The image on the screen told the story Reynolds had missed. Not bleeding, not shock. Something deeper, something structural, non-compressible, Emily continued. And that shadow, see it, that's not fluid. That's pressure where it doesn't belong. One of the nurses leaned closer. What does that mean? It means, Emily replied, he's not failing. He's being crushed from the inside. Reynolds, standing just outside the bay, felt his mouth go dry. Crushed. Emily adjusted the angle of the probe. Her jaw tightened just slightly. Blunt force exposure, she said. High impact. Likely sustained under extreme conditions. Like an explosion, the resident asked. Like surviving one, Emily corrected. She straightened and looked at the team. This isn't a standard ER fix. We need to relieve the pressure before his system collapses completely. The plainclothes man stepped forward. Time window. Emily glanced at the monitor. The numbers were falling again, slowly but relentlessly. 5 minutes, she said. Maybe less. Reynolds felt the words land like a punch. 5 minutes. Everything he'd done, every protocol he'd followed had been circling the wrong problem, and now the margin for error was almost gone. Dr. Emily said, not unkindly, I need you to authorize an emergency procedure. Reynolds looked up, startled. You want me to? I need the hospital to back this, she said. Formally. The irony stung. He hesitated. His pride screamed at him to push back, to reclaim control, to question her credentials again. But the monitor answered for him. Another alarm. Reynolds swallowed. Do it, he said. Whatever you need. Emily nodded once. Thank you. As the team prepared, the doors to the ER opened again. This time the effect was immediate. 2 men in dark suits entered their presence, commanding without a word spoken. One carried a slim briefcase. The other scanned the room, eyes sharp, movements economical. Hospital administration followed close behind, breathless and pale. What is going on? The administrator demanded, voice shaking. Why is there military personnel in my ER? The man with the briefcase didn't break stride. Because this patient matters. Emily didn't look up from her work. Sterile field, she said. Now, the administrator opened his mouth to argue. Then he saw the men around the bed, the equipment, the monitors, the intensity, and he fell silent. As Emily scrubbed in, fully muscle memory took over. The motions were precise, efficient, too efficient for someone who had supposedly spent her career on night shifts in a mid-sized civilian hospital. Reynolds watched her hands. No tremor, no hesitation. That was when the full weight of his mistake hit him. This wasn't a nurse improvising above her pay grade. This was someone returning to a role she'd never truly left. The patient's breathing grew shallow. The oxygen saturation dipped into dangerous territory. Pressures spiking, a nurse warned. I know, Emily said. I'm ahead of it. She positioned herself, eyes locked on the ultrasound feed, then nodded to the team. On my count, she said. 3, 2. The lights flickered. Just for a second. Then came the sound. Not loud. Not dramatic. A low, distant thud that reverberated through the building like thunder rolling beneath the floor. What was that? Someone whispered. Emily didn't answer. She finished the maneuver, hands moving with ruthless precision. The monitor beeped. Once, twice. Then the numbers steadied. Heart rate slowed. Blood pressure climbed. Oxygen saturation stabilized. A collective breath released in the room. He's responding, the resident said, disbelief in his voice. Emily didn't smile. She watched the monitor for a full 10 seconds before allowing herself to step back. Temporary, she said. We bought time, not a cure. Reynolds exhaled shakily. How much? Emily glanced at her watch. An hour, she said. If we're lucky. The man with the briefcase opened it and removed a tablet. Extraction is en route, he said. But there's a complication. Emily looked at him. There always is. The airspace is compromised, he continued. We can't move him by helicopter yet. Emily's jaw tightened. Then he doesn't leave. Ma'am, he doesn't leave, she repeated. Not until it's safe. Silence followed. Then the man nodded. Understood. Reynolds stared at the exchange, heart pounding. Who is he? He asked, gesturing weakly toward the patient. Emily looked at the man on the bed, at the scars, the stillness beneath the machines. Then she answered, not loudly but clearly. He's someone a lot of people would prefer stay alive, she said, and a lot of others would prefer didn't. The implication sent a chill through the room. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows like a countdown. Emily removed her gloves and stepped away from the bed. I'm clocked out, she said quietly, almost to herself. Then she looked at Reynolds. But I'm not leaving. As if summoned by her words, the overhead speakers crackled again. Attention, the calm voice announced. All exterior entrances are now under lockdown. Reynolds felt his stomach drop. Emily lifted her eyes toward the ceiling, listening, and for the first time since she'd entered the ER, her expression changed. Not fear, recognition. Everyone stay alert, she said. This isn't over. The word lockdown landed differently when it echoed through a hospital. It wasn't like a school drill or a weather advisory. In an ER, it meant doors, sealed, movement frozen, and every second suddenly accounted for. The hum of machinery seemed louder, the beeping monitors sharper. Even the air felt heavier, as if it had learned something dangerous and was holding its breath. Doctor, Mark Reynolds stood near the trauma bay doors, hands on his hips, trying to project control he no longer felt. Security, he said, raising his voice. I need an explanation. Now, no one answered him. The two men in suits had moved to opposite ends of the ER without being told, positioning themselves where they could see every entrance. One touched the earpiece, barely visible against his skin. Perimeter secure, he murmured. Emily watched the motion from the corner of her eye. She didn't interrupt her assessment of the patient, but her shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly, as if aligning herself with an unseen map only she could read. Pressure's holding a nurse, said softly. For now, Emily replied. Don't trust it. Reynolds turned to her frustration, bleeding through his restraint. Emily, you need to tell me what's happening. This is my department. Emily finally looked at him. Then start acting like it, she said evenly. Get your people calm. Panic kills faster than ignorance. The words stung because they were true. Across the ER, a gurney rattled as someone bumped into it by mistake. A young nurse flinched. The administrator hovered near the nurse's station, pale and sweating, whispering into his phone with no one on the other end. Why are we locked down? He hissed. I have patients, families, this isn't protocol. The man in the suit glanced at him. It is now. Another sound filtered in through the reinforced windows. Faint, rhythmic, footsteps, not running, not rushing, measured. Emily's gaze lifted. She recognized that cadence immediately. Lights, she said. Dim them. What? Reynolds asked. Do it, she said again. Something in her voice cut through the noise. A nurse reached for the controls and lowered the overhead lights to a softer glow. The ER sank into a muted half-shadow monitors and instrument panels casting pale blue and green reflections across tense faces. The footsteps grew louder. Then the doors opened. They didn't burst in. They slid open smoothly as if the building itself had decided to cooperate. 6 figures entered the ER in a staggered formation. Dark uniforms, tactical vests, weapons slung but not raised. Their eyes moved constantly, tracking angles, exits, shadows. Navy SEALs. There was no mistaking them, not for anyone who'd ever seen that kind of presence up close. Conversations died mid-word. One of the nurses gasped. Another whispered, "Oh my God!" Dr. Reynolds felt his throat tighten. "This is a hospital," he said weakly. "You can't bring." The team leader raised a hand and Reynolds stopped talking. Not because he was ordered to, because every instinct in his body told him this man did not negotiate with noise. The SEALs moved with fluid efficiency. 2, securing the perimeter. 2, scanning the patient bays, 1 remaining at the door. The team leader stepped forward. His eyes found Emily instantly. He approached her and stopped 3 feet away. The ER watched. He straightened. And then, in a motion so precise it seemed ceremonial, he brought his hand up in a crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said. The word hit the room like a dropped glass, sharp, fragile, impossible to ignore. Every eye turned to Emily. She returned the salute without hesitation. "At ease," she said quietly. The SEAL lowered his hand. "We received confirmation," he said. "Asset status." "Alive," Emily replied. "Unstable, but holding." The team leader nodded. "We'll take over security." "No," Emily said. The word was soft, but it stopped him cold. She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Not yet," she added. "This is still a hospital. You move like this becomes a battlefield." A flicker of respect crossed his face. "Understood." He turned to his team. "Perimeter only. Weapons remain slung." "Yes, sir." Reynolds felt dizzy. He stepped forward despite himself. "Emily," he said, voice strained. "Why are they calling you, doctor?" Emily said, cutting him off without looking away from the team leader. "I need a CT suite cleared and prepped. Now." Reynolds opened his mouth to argue. Then he remembered the monitor, the numbers that had almost vanished, the life that had only been saved because he'd finally stepped aside. He nodded. "I'll make it happen." As he moved away, the administrator grabbed his arm. "Mark, what is going on? Who is she?" Reynolds swallowed. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think we should have listened sooner." Across the room, one of the SEALs leaned toward Emily. "Ma'am, we have a potential external threat. Unknown number. Watching the building." Emily's expression didn't change. "How long minutes?" "Maybe less." She nodded once. "Then they're early." The team leader frowned. Early for what Emily finally looked back at the patient, for the mistake they're about to realize, she said. The patient's heart rate spiked suddenly. An alarm shrieked. "He's crashing," someone shouted. Emily moved instantly, already pulling on gloves again. "Get me back in," she said. "Now." As the team rushed to comply, the SEALs tightened their formation, eyes sharp, bodies coiled. Outside, somewhere beyond the rain and concrete, someone else was moving. And this time, they weren't coming to save anyone. The alarm's shrill cry sliced through the ER like a blade. Emily was already moving. "Epinephrine now," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the chaos. "Prepare for airway support. I want suction ready." Hands moved. Carts rolled. The rhythm of the room shifted from shock to action in a heartbeat. Even the SEALs adjusted, one stepping closer to the doorway, another angling himself to cover the corridor without ever raising his weapon. "Doctor." Reynolds found himself beside Emily again, passing instruments without being asked, reading her intent before she spoke. It unsettled him how natural it felt, how much easier it was to follow than to lead. "What changed?" he asked, breath tight. "External stressor," Emily replied. He felt it before we did. As if on cue, the overhead lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Somewhere deep in the building, a heavy door slammed shut. The man in the suit pressed a finger to his earpiece. "Movement confirmed," he murmured. "2, maybe 3. They're probing access points." The SEAL team leader's jaw set. "We need to extract. Now." Emily didn't look up from the patient. "You can't." "Ma'am, if you move him like this," she said, adjusting the ventilator with a steady hand, "he codes on the elevator. If you wait, he lives." Silence snapped taut between them. The team leader studied the monitor. The numbers told a fragile truth alive, but balanced on a knife's edge. "How long?" he asked. Emily glanced at the ultrasound, then at the patient's chest rising and falling under mechanical breath. 10 minutes, she said. "That's the window." The team leader turned to his men. 10-minute hold. "Yes, sir." They spread out silent and deliberate sealing corridors with their bodies rather than barricades. Hospital security melted into the background, suddenly aware of how little they could do and how much damage panic would cause. Outside Trauma Bay 2, the administrator wrung his hands. "This is insane," he whispered. "This can't be happening." Reynolds didn't answer. He was watching Emily's hands. They never shook. Another tremor rippled through the building, felt more than heard. Dust drifted from a ceiling tile somewhere down the hall. "That wasn't the helicopter," a nurse whispered. "No," Emily said. "That was a test." The patient's heart rate surged again. "Stay with me," Emily murmured, not to the team but to the man on the bed. "You've been through worse than this. Reynolds glanced at her. You know him. Emily's eyes never left the monitor. I know what he represents. A seal near the door stiffened. Mom, contact. Everyone froze. The footsteps came again, closer this time. Not the measured cadence of professionals. Faster, heavier, impatient. A voice echoed down the corridor. Hospital security, open up. The team leader's expression hardened. That's not our people. Emily exhaled slowly. They're fishing. For what? Reynolds asked. For him, Emily said. Or for me. The footsteps stopped just outside the ER doors. A shadow passed across the frosted glass. Then a sharp knock, 3 quick raps deliberate. The knock of someone who expected compliance. Emily didn't look up. Ignore it. The knock came again. Louder. Open the door, the voice barked. This is an emergency. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so deadly. The team leader leaned toward Emily. Ma'am, give the word. Not yet, she said. They want us to react. The patient's oxygen saturation dipped. Emily cursed under her breath. Come on, she whispered, making a minute adjustment. The number climbed back slowly. The knock turned into pounding. Last warning, the voice shouted. The seal nearest the door shifted his weight ready. Emily finally looked up. Now, she said. The doors slid open. The man on the other side wasn't hospital security. He wore a borrowed jacket and a badge that hung too low, his stance wrong, his eyes darting past the people in front of him, as if searching for something more valuable. He froze when he saw the room. The seals. The suits. Emily. The moment stretched. Then he reached for his waistband. The sound was deafening. Not the gunshot, there wasn't one, but the collective movement of trained bodies reacting as one. The man was on the floor in a blink, pinned, disarmed, his face pressed to the linoleum. Don't move, a seal said calmly. The man swore panic, cracking his voice. You don't know what you're doing. Emily stepped forward, gaze cold. I know exactly what I'm doing. She crouched beside him, her voice low. Who sent you? The man laughed too hard, too fast. You think this ends here? Emily straightened. No, she said. I think this ends with the truth. She turned back to the patient as the seals hauled the man away. 10 minutes, she said again, louder this time. We're not losing him now. Reynolds swallowed and moved beside her. What do you need? Emily met his eyes. Trust, she said. He nodded. You have it. The monitor beeped steadily, a fragile metronome counting down. Outside, more movement, more shadows. The hospital held its breath. And Emily Carter stood at the center of it all. No longer invisible, no longer underestimated, ready to finish what she'd started, no matter who tried to stop her. The man who had been pinned to the floor was dragged out of the ER without ceremony, his protests fading down the corridor until the doors sealed behind him. Silence rushed back in thick, charged, unfinished. Emily didn't watch him go. Her focus was on the monitor on the patient's chest, rising and falling with mechanical precision on the fragile equilibrium she'd forced his body into through sheer will and experience. 7 minutes, she said, checking her watch. The SEAL team leader nodded once. We can hold. I know, Emily replied. You always do. The familiarity in her tone made Reynolds pause. He looked from the team leader to Emily, pieces rearranging themselves in his mind. This wasn't a one-off interaction. This wasn't a fluke. This was history. The administrator hovered near the wall, clutching his phone like a lifeline. We need to call the board, he whispered. This is going to. The man in the suit cut him off. The board is aware. The administrator's eyes widened. Aware of what? That this hospital is about to become the safest place in the state, the man replied flatly. Emily glanced over. Less talking, she said. More space. They backed off. Reynolds found himself standing closer to Emily again, drawn by the gravity of the moment. You said he felt the threat before we did, he said quietly. How Emily adjusted the ivy-drip fingers steady. Because he's trained to. For what? Reynolds asked. Emily didn't answer immediately. She watched the patient's vitals stabilize another fraction, then spoke. To survive things that don't announce themselves, she said. The overhead speakers crackled. Attention, the calm voice announced. Unidentified vehicles have been stopped at the outer perimeter. Situation remains contained. A murmur rippled through the ER. The team leader exhaled slowly. They moved faster than expected. They always do, Emily said. Because they assume no one's ready. She looked up at him. That's their mistake. The patient stirred, just a twitch of fingers, barely perceptible. Reynolds leaned in. He's responding to stimuli. Emily nodded. Good. That means the pressure's holding. She stepped back from the bed for the first time since the crash sequence had begun, rolling her shoulders once, as if loosening muscles she'd been holding tight. The team leader watched her carefully. "Ma'am," he said, lower now, "command wants to know if you're activating." Emily closed her eyes for half a second. "Ma'am, one hoke, one ho, one ho, one ho, one ho, one ho, one ho, one ho." When she opened them, something in her expression shifted, not fear, not reluctance, but acceptance. "Yes," she said. "Limited scope." The man in the suit tapped his earpiece. "You heard her." Reynolds frowned, activating what Emily looked at him. For the first time since she'd walked back into the ER, she didn't soften the truth. "My authority," she said. Reynolds swallowed. "Authority over situations like this," she replied. "When civilian systems aren't enough." Another tremor ran through the building, closer this time. A dull thud reverberated through the walls. "What was that?" a nurse asked, voice tight. "Distraction," Emily said. "They're trying to pull resources." The team leader's radio crackled. "Perimeter breach attempt at the south loading dock. Neutralized." Emily didn't react. "Good." Reynolds stared at her. "You're not even surprised." "I planned for it," she said. "Weeks ago." The words hit him harder than any accusation. "Weeks," he echoed. Emily finally turned to face him fully. "I recognized the signs when he came through the door," she said. "The scars, the way he held himself even unconscious, the question he kept asking." "What question?" Reynolds asked. "Whether he'd missed the window," Emily replied, "because he knew there was one." Reynolds felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Window for what?" he asked. "For someone to try to finish what they started," Emily said. The patient's monitor beeped, steadily oblivious to the conversation happening around it. Emily stepped closer to the bed, her voice dropping. "He survived something he wasn't supposed to," she said, "and people don't like loose ends." The team leader shifted. "Ma'am, 5 minutes." Emily nodded. "Prep for controlled movement. We're not extracting yet, but we're relocating." Where Reynolds asked. Emily looked at him. "Or 3. Reinforced. No windows. Closest to the interior stairwell." Reynolds hesitated. "That's not standard protocol." Emily met his gaze. "Neither is this night." Another alarm chirped, this time from the security system. Multiple detentions confirmed, the overhead voice announced. Threat level decreasing. A breath went through the room, relief mixed with disbelief. Emily didn't relax. 4 minutes, she said. As the team prepared to move the patient, Reynolds found himself walking beside her again. "You could have said something," he said quietly. "Earlier. About who you were." Emily didn't look at him. "Would you have listened?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "No," he admitted. She nodded. "Exactly." The gurney rolled smoothly out of trauma bay, 2 SEALs flanking it like shadows. The corridor ahead was empty, cleared with ruthless efficiency. As they passed, the nurses' station staff stared, some in awe, some in shame, all suddenly aware that the quiet woman they'd overlooked carried a weight none of them had seen. One nurse whispered, "Who is she?" Emily heard it. She didn't answer. They reached OR3 without incident. The doors sealed behind them with a heavy clang that echoed finality. Inside, the lighting was softer, the air controlled the space designed for precision. 3 minutes, the team leader said. Emily leaned over the patient again, adjusting lines, checking responses. "You're not done yet," she murmured to him. "Not tonight." The patient's fingers twitched again, stronger this time. Reynolds watched, heart pounding. "You saved him," he said. Emily shook her head. "Not yet." She straightened and looked around the room. "We still have to survive the aftermath," she said. As if summoned by her words, the lights flickered once more, then steadied. The hospital exhaled. But Emily didn't. Because she knew better than anyone that the most dangerous moments weren't during the fight. They were right after. The doors to OR3 sealed with a muted hydraulic sigh, shutting out the chaos of the ER and locking everyone inside a controlled artificial calm. The room smelled of antiseptic and cold metal. Surgical lights hovered overhead like watchful eyes. Emily stood at the head of the gurney, hands resting lightly on the rail, watching the patient's chest rise and fall. The monitor maintained a steady rhythm now, not strong but stable, the kind of stability that could vanish if mishandled. 2 minutes, the SEAL team leader said quietly. Emily nodded. That's all I need. Reynolds lingered near the wall, arms crossed tightly as if anchoring himself in place. He felt like a guest in his own hospital, no worse. Like a bystander. What happens after those 2 minutes? He asked. Emily didn't answer right away. She checked the patient's pupils, adjusted a line, then finally spoke. After that, she said, the truth stops being optional. The words sat heavy in the air. One of the men in suits glanced up from his tablet. Ma'am, command confirms all external threats neutralized. Detained individuals are in custody. Emily exhaled slowly. Good. Reynolds frowned. Detained by who? The man didn't look at him. People whose names you won't find on any organizational chart. That should have terrified Reynolds. Instead, it humbled him. The patient stirred again, this time more clearly. A low sound escaped his throat, halfway between a groan and a breath. He's waking up, a nurse said. Emily moved instantly. Easy, she murmured, leaning closer. You're safe. Don't fight it. The patient's eyes fluttered open. They were sharp despite the sedation. Alert. Assessing. They found Emily immediately. A faint, exhausted smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Told them, he rasped. Told them you'd still be close. Emily's jaw tightened. Save your strength, she said softly. You did your part. Reynolds' heart skipped. He knows you. Yes, Emily said, and that's why he trusted this place. The team leader stepped forward. Sir, he said to the patient, we're preparing to move you. The patient's gaze shifted to him, then back to Emily. Not yet, he whispered. They'll be listening. Emily nodded. I know. She straightened and turned toward the room, voice carrying authority, now unmistakable, undeniable. Everyone listen, she said. What happens next stays in this room unless I say otherwise. No one argued. Dr. Reynolds, she continued, looking directly at him, you deserve an explanation. Reynolds swallowed. Yes, he said quietly. I think I do. Emily took a breath. I wasn't always a nurse, she said. And I didn't come to Mercy General by accident. The room seemed to lean in. For 15 years, she continued, I served as a combat medical officer attached to special operations units. My job wasn't just to save lives, it was to decide which lives could be saved in time. Reynolds felt his chest tighten. I planned missions, Emily said. I advised commanders. I stood in places where hesitation meant body bags. She gestured toward the patient. He was part of one of those missions. The patient closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. She kept us alive, he said hoarsely. All of us. Emily ignored the praise. When that mission went wrong, she said he was exposed to something classified, something that didn't leave visible wounds right away. Reynolds frowned. Then why wasn't this handled at a military facility? Because he disappeared, Emily said. By design. The team leader shifted. Ma'am, it's time, Emily said firmly. She turned back to Reynolds. Someone wanted him quiet. Not dead immediately, just deteriorating. Enough to look natural. Reynolds' stomach churned. You're saying this was intentional? Yes, Emily said. And you nearly helped them. The words weren't cruel. They were factual. Reynolds closed his eyes, shame burning hot behind them. I warned you, Emily continued, not because I wanted control, because I recognized the pattern. She stepped closer. That wasn't anxiety. That wasn't bad luck. That was engineered failure. The silence that followed was absolute. One of the nurses whispered, "Oh my God." The man in the suit spoke. "Ma'am, command is ready to move forward." Emily nodded. Then, let's finish this. She turned to the patient. Can you handle transport now? He took a careful breath. With you here, yes. Emily met the team leader's gaze. We move in 30 seconds. Controlled. No lights. No sirens. Yes, ma'am. Reynolds watched as the room sprang into motion again, this time with purpose sharpened by truth. He stepped aside instinctively, no longer trying to insert himself where he didn't belong. As they prepared to move, Reynolds cleared his throat. Emily. She paused, looking back at him. I was wrong, he said. About you. About everything. Emily studied him for a long moment. Being wrong isn't the problem, she said. Refusing to listen is. He nodded, absorbing the lesson, too late, but not too late to matter. The gurney rolled toward the doors. The SEALs moved first, clearing the path, bodies angled, eyes sharp. As the doors opened, the overhead speakers crackled one last time. "Attention," the calm voice announced. "Lockdown lifted. Situation resolved." Resolved. Reynolds knew better now. This wasn't resolution. This was consequence. As Emily walked beside the patient, guiding him out of O3 and toward the secured transport corridor, she felt the weight she'd carried for years settle into something solid. Not peace, but purpose. Behind her, Dr. Mark Reynolds stood alone in the operating room, staring at the place where authority had shifted hands and understanding finally what real power looked like. And somewhere deep in the hospital, far from the lights and uniforms, the quiet reckoning continued. The transport corridor beneath Mercy General was never meant for moments like this. It was narrow, windowless, and utilitarian, built decades earlier as a service passage connecting the operating wing to a reinforced loading bay. Most nights it echoed with rolling carts and tired footsteps. Tonight it felt like the spine of the building itself, carrying a secret too heavy for the upper floors. The gurney moved smoothly, guided by steady hands. Emily walked at its side, one palm resting lightly on the rail, the other monitoring the IV lines and portable monitor. The patient's breathing remained controlled, shallow but consistent. Behind them, the SEALs flowed like shadows, silent and precise. Ahead, the corridor lights flicked on in sequence as if anticipating their approach. Dr. Mark Reynolds followed at a distance, unsure if he was invited or merely tolerated. No one told him to stop. No one told him to continue. That somehow felt worse. The man in the suit walked beside Emily, now his voice low. "Transport vehicle is staged. Secure, armored, unmarked." Emily nodded. "Good. We'll be out of the city in under 4 minutes." "Also good," she said. "But don't rush the transfer." He hesitated. "Ma'am, with respect, speed is irrelevant if his pressure spikes," Emily finished. "We move when I say." The man didn't argue. Reynolds noticed that. As they reached the reinforced bay doors, the air changed cooler, heavier, smelling faintly of oil and rain. Outside, engines idled softly. No sirens, no flashing lights, just readiness. "Hold," Emily said. The gurney stopped. She leaned over the patient, checking his pupils again, watching the subtle rise of his chest. Her face softened, not with sentiment, but with resolve. "You're almost clear," she murmured. "Stay with me." The patient's fingers tightened weakly around the edge of the blanket. "Did they get them?" he asked. Emily met his eyes. "Yes." A breath left him long and shaky. "Good." She straightened. "Move." The doors opened. The transfer was flawless, practiced. The gurney slid into the waiting vehicle, locking mechanisms clicking into place with satisfying finality. Equipment was secured. Lines checked again. The team leader stepped up. "Ma'am, once we leave, you won't be able to follow." Emily nodded. "I know." Reynolds' heart jumped. "You're not going with them." Emily shook her head. "My role ends here." The words stunned him more than anything else that night. "But they need you," he said before he could stop himself. Emily looked at him, not unkindly. "They needed me to get him this far," she said. "Now they need me to stay." The team leader hesitated. "Command won't like that." Emily's gaze hardened. "Command doesn't run this hospital." A beat passed. Then the team leader nodded. "Understood." The vehicle doors closed. The engine deepened its hum. Before stepping back, the patient caught Emily's sleeve. "Emily," he whispered. She leaned closer. "They'll try again," he said. "Not tonight, but soon." "I know," she replied. "That's why you're leaving." "And you," Emily smiled faintly. "I'm harder to corner." The vehicle rolled out into the rain and disappeared into the night without ceremony. Silence settled in the bay. Reynolds stood beside Emily, watching the empty space where something monumental had just passed through. "You just let them take him," he said softly. "Yes," Emily replied. "And you stayed?" "Yes." "Why?" Emily took a long breath. "Because the threat isn't gone. It's just shifting." She turned and began walking back toward the hospital interior. Reynolds followed instinctively. "Back upstairs," she said. "We still have work to do." As they ascended, Reynolds struggled to reconcile the woman beside him with the assumptions he'd made only hours earlier. You could have had anything he said. Rank, authority, resources. Emily glanced at him. I still do. Then why choose this, he asked. Night shifts. Being ignored. Disrespected. They reached the stairwell door. Emily paused before opening it. Because power attracts attention, she said. And attention attracts the wrong people. She met his eyes. I needed to be invisible. The door opened. The familiar hum of the hospital rushed back. Voices, footsteps, life resuming its normal rhythm, unaware of how close it had come to catastrophe. In the ER staff were slowly returning to their stations, shaken but functional. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. Rumors already began to form, half-true and dangerous. The administrator spotted Emily and hurried over. We need to talk, he said. About tonight. About what happened. About. Emily held up a hand. No, she said. You don't. The administrator blinked. Excuse me. You don't need explanations, Emily continued. You need policies, better listening, and fewer egos. She looked at Reynolds, not accusingly but pointedly. And you need to decide, she added, what kind of hospital this is going to be. The administrator swallowed. The board will ask questions. Emily nodded. They always do. And what do I tell them, he asked. Emily considered this. Tell them the truth, she said. That a patient came in, that the system failed him, and that people corrected it. The administrator hesitated, and you, Emily, shook her head. I'm not part of the story. Reynolds felt something twist in his chest. As the administrator retreated, Reynolds turned to her. They won't forget this. I know, Emily said. That's why I won't be here forever. The words landed heavier than she intended. You're leaving, Reynolds asked. Eventually, she replied. But not yet. A nurse approached hesitantly. Emily, they're asking for you in Trauma Bay 2. Emily nodded. I'll be there. She took a step, then stopped. Reynolds watched as she clipped her badge back onto her jacket, this time on the outside. I'm clocked back in, she said quietly. Reynolds managed a small, rueful smile. I guess I should say, welcome back. Emily met his gaze. Just listen this time. As she walked away, the ER seemed to subtly realign around her movements, smoothing voices, lowering respect, taking root where dismissal once lived. But far above the city, in places no hospital lights reached, plans were already being rewritten, because someone had noticed. And they did not like being outmaneuvered. By the time the sun began to thin the darkness at the edge of the city, Mercy General Hospital had settled into a strange, uneasy calm. It wasn't peace. It was aftermath. The ER looked the same stretchers, same monitors, same antiseptic smell, but the way people moved through it had changed. Conversations were quieter. Eyes lingered longer. And whenever Emily Carter crossed the floor, the space around her seemed to open without anyone consciously deciding to move. She noticed. She pretended not to. Emily stood at the nurse's station, reviewing charts, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral. To anyone watching closely, though, there were signs, micro-adjustments in stance, awareness of reflections in glass, the subtle way her attention tracked movement without ever appearing to. She was back on duty, but she was no longer invisible. Dr. Mark Reynolds watched her from across the department, a paper cup of cold coffee forgotten in his hand. The events of the night replayed in fragments, monitors, screaming SEALs saluting authority, dissolving under pressure. For the first time in his career, Reynolds understood how small his title really was. He walked over slowly. Emily, he said. She didn't look up. If this is about the patient from room 7, his potassium's borderline but stable. Reynolds blinked. I know. I meant last night. She finally met his gaze. The room felt quieter. I've filed my report, Reynolds said. Full disclosure, including my mistakes. That surprised her, and she asked. And the administration requested an emergency review, he continued. Effective immediately. Emily nodded. That's appropriate. Reynolds hesitated. I've also requested to step down as lead for trauma intake for now. That did make her pause. Why? She asked. Because I need to relearn how to listen, he said simply. And because if I don't say it out loud, I'll pretend this never happened. Emily studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. That's acceptable. Relief crossed his face. Across the room, a group of nurses whispered among themselves. One of them, young, newly licensed, finally broke away and approached Emily. Emily, she said softly. Yes, I just wanted to say, thank you, the nurse said. For last night. For everything. Emily held her gaze. Do your job well, she said. That's thanks enough. The nurse smiled, emboldened. Is it true? About you, Emily tilted her head. What have you heard that you used to be? Military, the nurse said, lowering her voice. Like high level. Emily didn't answer. The nurse flushed. Sorry, I shouldn't have. You should be careful, Emily said gently, not curious. The nurse nodded quickly and stepped away. Emily returned to her charts. Reynolds watched the exchange, understanding now what had taken him years to learn that authority didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed, waiting to be recognized. The administrator approached next, flanked by two stiff-looking men in suits. He cleared his throat. Emily, he began, we've had inquiries. Emily didn't look up. From where? The administrator hesitated. Federal, and others. She closed the chart and set it down carefully. Here's how this goes, Emily said calmly. No press, no internal memos, no rumors. That may not be possible, one of the men in suits said. Emily finally looked at him. It was not a threatening look. It was worse. Try, she said. The man swallowed. The administrator shifted. There's also the matter of Dr. Reynolds' actions. Emily glanced at Reynolds. He's already addressed them, she said. If you want accountability, start with culture, not scapegoats. The administrator nodded, chastened. Understood. As they left, Reynolds exhaled slowly. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Emily replied. This only works if people are allowed to change. A beat passed. Will you stay? Reynolds asked. Emily considered the question more seriously than she expected. For now, she said. This place needs recalibration. Reynolds smiled faintly. That's one word for it. The morning wore on. Patients came and went. A car accident victim, a child with a fever. Life, relentless and ordinary, reclaimed the space. And yet beneath it all, Emily felt it. The shift, not in the hospital, in the air. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket. She didn't take it out immediately. When she finally did, the message was short. They noticed. Not here. Not today. But you're visible now. Emily's thumb hovered over the screen. She typed back only 2 words. I know. She slipped the phone away and looked up just as Reynolds returned with updated labs. Everything good? He asked. For now, Emily said. Outside, the sun rose fully above the city, casting light through the ER windows, clean, revealing unforgiving. Emily watched it for a moment. Then she squared her shoulders and stepped back into the flow of the department, her presence no longer questioned, no longer ignored. But somewhere far from Mercy General, in places that thrived on shadows and silence, a file had been reopened. A name circled. Not the patient. Hers. The day shift came in quietly, as if the hospital itself had decided not to draw attention to the night that refused to be forgotten. Emily Carter stood near the large ER windows, watching sunlight spill across the parking lot. The rain had stopped. Pavement steamed faintly as the morning warmed, erasing every visible trace of what had happened hours earlier. Inside, however, nothing had been erased. A trauma nurse paused mid-step when she saw Emily and nodded, respectful, deliberate. A resident straightened unconsciously as Emily passed. Conversations lowered not out of fear but awareness. Power had changed hands without a ceremony. Dr. Mark Reynolds approached her one last time before heading upstairs to meet the review board. He looked tired, older, but lighter somehow. They're calling it a systems failure, he said. Not an individual one. Emily nodded. That's accurate. He hesitated. And you? I'm not in the report, she replied. I never am. Reynolds exhaled, then met her eyes. For what it's worth, I won't forget. Emily studied him. You're not supposed to, she said. You're supposed to do better. He nodded once deeply, then turned and walked away. Minutes later, the ER doors slid open and a small group of federal officials entered, not in a rush, not in formation. They didn't ask for Emily. They didn't need to. One of them stopped beside her. Miss Carter, he said quietly, careful to keep his tone neutral. We appreciate your cooperation. Emily didn't look at him. I wasn't aware I'd been uncooperative. A pause. No, the man admitted. You weren't. She turned to face him. Then we're done here. He nodded. For now, they left without another word. The hospital returned to routine monitors, beeping stretchers, rolling life, asserting itself with stubborn persistence. The story would fracture into rumors, half-truths and denials. Most people would forget. That was always the hope. Emily retrieved her jacket from the locker room and clipped her badge off once more. As she stepped into the stairwell that led toward the employee exit, her phone vibrated again. Another message. You should leave. They're reshaping the board. Next time won't be subtle. Emily leaned against the cool concrete wall and closed her eyes. For years, she had lived between worlds too visible to disappear completely, too quiet to attract attention. Mercy General had been a place to breathe, to heal, to exist without being needed every second of every day. Now that illusion was gone. She typed back slowly. I'll finish what I started. Then I'll go. She slipped the phone into her pocket and pushed open the exit door. The morning air hit her face crisp and clean. The city moved on around her cars, pedestrians, the distant wail of sirens that had nothing to do with her. Emily crossed the parking lot toward her car boots, crunching softly on gravel. Halfway there, she stopped. A black SUV idled near the far edge of the lot, engine running. The windows were tinted too dark. It hadn't been there when she arrived. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she kept walking. The SUV didn't move. Emily unlocked her car, slid inside, and sat with her hands resting on the steering wheel. She didn't start the engine right away. She watched the reflection in the rearview mirror. The SUV pulled away slowly, disappearing into traffic. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She glanced back at the hospital one last time. From the outside, Mercy General looked peaceful, ordinary, just another building full of people doing their best. Emily smiled faintly. Take care of them, she murmured. Then she started the engine and drove off. Behind her in an office far removed from the ER, a sealed folder was being updated. Not with commendations, with contingencies. Because the problem with underestimating someone once was that you rarely survived doing it twice. And Emily Carter had just reminded them why. Sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who never ask to be noticed. They don't raise their voices. They don't demand respect. They earn it quietly through competence, restraint, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. Emily was dismissed because she didn't fit the image people expected. A nurse, a night shift, someone easy to overlook. And in that blindness, others nearly helped destroy what they didn't understand. True authority isn't granted by titles or uniforms. It's revealed under pressure when the stakes are high, the clock is unforgiving, and ego has no value. The lesson is simple, but uncomfortable. Listen before you judge, respect before you dismiss, and never assume you know someone's limits just because they don't announce them. Heroes don't always arrive with sirens or medals. Sometimes they're already there doing the work, waiting for the moment it matters. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from, and what stood out to you most? And if you believe quiet strength deserves recognition, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.